He lied to me for 8 years. I signed my name at the bottom of the page in a hotel room that smells faintly of boiled garlic and stale perfume. The pen feels ordinary in my hand. The paper is not. It lists dates and signatures and the exact moment a legal tie loosens, but none of it can untangle what was woven into the quieter corners of my life. The mornings he never stayed for, the dinners where my presence was a courtesy, the private jokes that landed somewhere he never bothered to learn I existed for. A drop of chili oil, left over from last night's room service, stains the cuff of my silk sleeve. It's absurd, a domestic smear on a day that has been nothing but decisions and addresses and accountant's stamps. The oil glitters like a stubborn, ridiculous badge. I wipe it with the corner of the paper and keep writing. When people say walked away, they picture a dramatic exit, papers torn, doors slammed, a finale of fury. My hand is steady. I fold the papers, place them in the envelope, and slide the ring, gold, narrow, heavy in ways I'd only felt at the base of my throat, onto his side of the contract, as if reassigning it to the legal world where it belongs. The ring is colder than I remember. I pressed it once into the ballroom fountain years ago, pretending it slipped, diving with numb fingers to fish it out while everyone watched and applauded his gallantry. He clapped. He kissed me on the cheek as if that clarified everything. He never knew my favorite roses were the pink ones, not red. He never asked. My voice in the mirror is composed. For 8 years, I tell myself, you were his wife on paper, not in practice. The sentence feels like the exact weight of all those mornings. It will be the sentence I say less and show more. I call the concierge. He nods as if he sees a common request and brings a small white box for me to hand over. I do it without drama. You learn the economy of small gestures when survival depends on them. A memory rises sharp as steam. The night the oil splashed across my forearm at the company banquet. He said something to Claire across the table, something soft and private, that made her laugh and made me feel like the glass between us was not a wall but a world. I touched the burn without thinking, letting the sting remind me that my skin could still feel. That was when the fuse lit. Not with violence, but with the slow, sure accumulation of being unremarked. The hot pot incident did not cause the leaving. It announced what had already been true, that my life had been leased, contractually and emotionally, to someone who thought terms could replace tenderness. If this story is going to mean anything to you, stick around. I promise you it gets stranger before it gets merciful. We met under the sort of pressure you read about in novels, family debts, reputations to be repaired, an arranged union dressed as convenience.
My family had an obligation, an old ledger, a father's signature that could not be erased, and his family had a solution wrapped in advantage. The contract was clear. It was not the kind of thing you sign with your heart. It was a ledger of favors, exchange rates for loyalty, measured in dowries and shareholdings and quiet obligations that would ripple decades later. I signed because my choices were not open in the ways some people imagine. I signed because survival, for my family, required that I become a bridge. He, Theodore, everyone called him Pei in the boardrooms and Pongwin in the quieter rooms, was polite. He was not cruel. He was, in fact, expertly ordinary, handsome enough to satisfy eyes, compartmentalized enough to keep his kindness for those he truly adored. But those he adored were very few, and they were not me. "You're so quiet," he'd say when the cameras were off and his touch was a courtesy rather than curiosity. "You don't complain." It was always framed as praise. His words settled like dust. Complaints would have been inconvenient, expensive to process for both our families. Better to be mute and useful. Little humiliations are more corrosive than one might expect. They don't explode, they erode. The first time a birthday present I bought him turned up in a pawn shop window because he needed cash briefly, a euphemism that included my ribboned box. It felt like a postcard from a life where my small, careful offerings could be repurposed without notice. The assistant told me it was gone without asking if it mattered. The pay matriarch, Genevieve, smiled at my polite questions as if they were naivete. "We are practical people," she said. "Feelings get in the way of legacy." They call that legacy with the casual cruelty of people discussing weather. Claire was not an invention. She was an aperture in his life where light concentrated. She laughed with an ease that did not belong to the carefully scheduled. She loved to be seen. Theodore loved to see her. That should have been tolerable had he not made a habit of choosing her gaze over mine at precise public intervals. The awards night when he accepted a plaque and slipped his hand into hers for one photographed second. The art opening where he complimented her taste with an earshot so that everyone could triangulate where his preferences truly lay. He would come to me at home later, quiet, apologetic in a way that felt rehearsed, and kiss my brow the way one browns a toast, minimal, functional. It was almost not deception, it was omission multiplied by repetition until it became a pattern. The contract complicated anything like retaliation. Outwardly, I had everything an outsider could not take away: a title, access, a life filmed and curated for public approval. But the legal pages I signed spelled out the limits of my agency: an allowance attached to compliance, consequences tied to defiance. The wording read like a polite strangulation. In private, I could not simply leave.
There were clauses and repayments and the weight of shame that my parents would bear if I fractured the arrangement. There were implications for my sister's dowry, my brother's future. You learn to measure your heart in decimals when your choices alter more than one life. So I was patient. I love patience for what it teaches. Small, fierce rebellions. I learned to reclaim pieces of myself that could not be spelled out in contracts. I took to the early mornings with a camera, capturing light on balconies and the peculiar expression of cups left alone. I collected the small things that were mine because no one could commodify them. The way my hands remembered handwriting, the smell of jasmine in a back alley market. These were quiet rebellions. They were also practice. There was the ring episode. He liked spectacles, Theodore did. At a holiday gala by the fountain, he staged a moment that made everyone coo, a playful argument over a ring he dropped. Guests held their breath as I dove. My fingers found metal in the cold water, slick and heavy. I rose laughing, wet silk clinging to my skin, while cameras flashed and people applauded his generosity. He draped a towel over my shoulders as if my shivering belonged to the drama he curated. Later, alone, when I asked why he had done it, he shrugged. People like romance, he said. It keeps them watching. It never occurred to him that I had almost lost a piece of myself in the performance. Those years accumulate. 8 of them is not a number you blink at. It is an epoch. There are small rituals that lock into patterns. The same tea at 7, the same chair at noon, the same polite avoidance of certain topics. There are also the public scenes, family banquets where I am introduced as Mrs. Pay, the corporate boxes where my smile is a prop and my opinion is a footnote. The press photographs the couple and the captions write themselves. A stable union, Pay family's generosity. No journalist ever asks what letters the contract contains. People think that the knowledge of a contract would be the moment everything crumbles. They imagine revelation, followed by immediate outrage. That is rarely the truth. Knowing puts you in a different kind of weather. You plan. You learn your routes. You cultivate a few allies. Sometimes the very knowledge becomes your instrument. I learned to keep receipts. I kept copies of bank transfers that showed the shackles in ink. I photocopied the pages between midnight and dawn under the hum of a borrowed office light, the smell of toner like a second skin. My breaking point wasn't a single scene. It was a catalog: the ring in water, the pawned gift, the repeated invisibility, the waiter who showed me the menu like a map labeled staff only, and the way my name felt like a paper label in a wardrobe of names. But there are moments that crystallize in tension. For me, it was the hot pot. We were at an intimate gathering of the family's closest associates, an evening that had to look convivial for the Fu family, who were considering a merger. Someone suggested a hot pot as a humble counterbalance to the suits. It was a small indulgence. The pot sat at the center of the table like a low, breathing thing. Conversation fizzed around it. His laughter found Claire like a compass. At one point, a server reached across to adjust the broth. In the scramble, a ladle knocked and splashed oil. The oil hit my arm. It was accidental. The oil left a burn that blistered with a geography of tenderness and pain. He worried, briefly, fawningly, but he did not stop the evening. He kissed my hand to make it seem as though the kiss had healing powers. He later told anyone who asked that he had certainly been concerned in the approximate way people arrange concerts for their ego. I did not leave because of the hot pot. I left because the hot pot made visible how little I mattered when it was inconvenient for him to matter. The little humiliations had accumulated into a ledger larger than the contract itself. That night, after the guests left and the kitchen staff cleared the trove of plates, I sat in his study and read through the clause I had once tried to forget, a paragraph about public decorum and obligations to family image, and a footnote about financial penalties tied to unilateral termination of the marriage in the first decade. The wording was precise, the threat polite. My head cleared in a way it had not in years. I turned off the lamp, put the paper in my purse, and mapped a route out. People assume that if you seek freedom, the path is loud. It is not.
Planning requires quiet and small kindnesses to oneself. I hired a lawyer in a town 2 hours away. I kept an alias phone number for emergency calls. I taught a neighbor to water my plants in a pattern that suggested I was still at home when I would be halfway across an ocean. I withdrew small sums from accounts with methods that would pass unnoticed on ledgers, like a swimmer cutting through a river in the wake of a ferry where no one watches. I bought a ticket in the name I used for my morning workshops, the one that wasn't his, the one that belonged to the woman who took photos of laundry lines and published them online for a boutique magazine. The ticket was not an act of theft, it was a reclamation. The family noticed in the ways tight nets notice holes. Gifts disappeared from rooms where I had placed them. The pay matriarch called with a voice sweet as a discount. "Are you unwell, dear?" she asked the way a viper might. Genevieve was used to men and alliances. She was a woman who could be tender and cut like a guillotine's edge if it suited her legacy. I answered her politely, not because I wanted to keep peace, but because it was good theater. I wanted to be clear that leaving would not be a tantrum. I would not broadcast my rebellion for applause.
I left in small acts of finality. I emptied the jewelry box of pieces that could not be claimed, mailed as gifts to charity the items that had become too entangled with his family's brand. I made careful notes about my own property. I wrote long letters, careful, not inflamed, to the people who might be affected. You cannot unmake obligations with kindness, but you can choose the way you break them. The night I left, I put a sweater in a carry-on, a pair of shoes, and the camera that had become my salvation. My phone rang once, his number. I did not answer. I watched the screen light up and shrink in the dark like any other phone would. Later it went to message not delivered. Someone else had turned it off for me. They assumed I would come back. At the airport, the world smelled of engine oil and paper. I had the odd sensation of leaving a funeral for the self I had been and stepping into a new life, neutral as a passport. The plane window framed a city like an annotated map. Below, the estate looked tidy and ancient, the lights of a life arranged for optics. My heart nodded with a realization. This was not a clean cut. Contractual ties mean there will be consequences. Payments, gossip, reputations tarnished. But consequence is not the same thing as captivity. There is a crucial difference between a price and a chain. For 8 years, he had not lied with one clever act. He lied by habit and omission. The contract was the ledger, an explicit truth about the terms of our life together. The lie was deeper. He had never seen me as a choice. I had been the default. I had been the small kindness that required no effort. People regard that sort of invisibility as security because it is convenient. I regarded it as a slow theft. After I left, the family ran through all the plans one imagines: calls, emissaries, reassurances. There were last-ditch dinners where they tried to appeal to my sense of duty. The Fu family was watching, calculating the impact on proposed mergers. The Pei siblings sent terse messages. The narrative they rehearsed to themselves, "She will return," was a small talisman against change. They could not imagine a woman without their scaffolding. I felt their disbelief like a gust of cold air, but it did not blow me over. I had rehearsed for this disapproval. I had rehearsed not for vindication, but for a quiet life that allowed me to be fully myself without footnotes. There were practicalities, too. I had to make sure no one could reach the accounts that tethered me to the household. I had to ensure that if they pursued legal penalties, clauses about payments in the event of unilateral termination, they would find an empty chair and no leverage on my person. They would have the legal right to pursue monies. They would not have my conscience to bargain with. That is a strange kind of freedom, to know the price and still pay it willingly for the sake of your soul. On the flight, I opened a small sketchbook and began to draw. It felt irreverent and brave to mark paper with charcoal and a sky charged with someone else's weather. I drew hands and fountains and a ring suspended like a planet. I drew pink roses with a clumsy tenderness. These small acts felt like prayer, but quieter, less supplication than claim. I did not immediately broadcast my departure. I would not be the subject of a pity column. I wanted the first day of my new life to be unmediated by cameras and analysis. I wanted to be alone with the knowledge that I had acted. You can spend a lifetime waiting for your life to begin. You can also choose the day you stop waiting. But escape is never a private act.
The world catches up quickly if you have lived in a place where names are capitalized. The pay network mobilized gently at first. Messages from mutual acquaintances, questions couched in concern. When concern fails, leverage finds subtler points of pressure. There were calls to my mother that flattened her. There were hints at the social consequences for my sister if I persisted. These were the old instruments of compliance. They can make even the most practiced rebel look like a reckless child. I called Elias once before I left. Elias had been a friend in a life before marriage, someone I had loved and left for duty, not because I wanted to, but because duty was a narrower, more obvious path. He did not ask for details. He simply said, "Come find me," like a compass pointing to a harbor. When you have been taught to keep your storms orderly, a single person who offers a non-judgmental berth becomes dangerous and necessary. Elias was not a savior. He was an ally who showed up at the margins of my life with the steady things I had been starved for, a notice that my existence mattered, independent of any family ledger. That, more than anything, made leaving possible. When I arrived in the city where my ticket had promised anonymity, I stayed in a small pension that smelled of strong coffee. I rented a room the color of old postcards and spent 2 days walking without purpose, letting my feet decide where I needed to practice being myself. I ate street food from a vendor who did not know my name. I learned the names of the flowers in a market. I bought notebooks with pages thick enough to survive years. But the thing about moving away is that it is not only distance you cultivate, you also cultivate silence. I left a note for the assistant at the house, practical, unheeded. "Please forward my mail to this address," it said. I left the ring with a small trust for safekeeping, and I sent a photograph of the paperwork to a lawyer. How you vanish and leave trails without being reclaimed is an art you perfect with small, exacting choices. I did not expect the headlines to ignore me for long. The Pei family was a story. I had been a prop. The press lent themselves to speculation, and speculation is often crueler than reporting. Pictures of me from earlier years resurfaced, with captions that felt like verdicts.
No one asked what the contract had actually said. No one queried the ledger that had bound us, because the more comfortable story is that I had been a woman who walked away for reasons that fit tidy narratives. It is strange how quickly people reinvent narratives to suit convenience. Genevieve used the most practiced language of the guilt-inducing matriarch. "We weather these things for the family," she wrote in a letter that read like a ceasefire. "Your well-being is important." There was no apology for the contract. There was only the maintenance of a myth, that families are sturdy and women are the ones who must keep them so. I did not respond. I had nothing to gain from their contrition and everything to lose from their drama. 2 days after my departure, someone returned the ring, anonymously, to the fountain where it had been staged. I happened to see it in a photo posted by a local account. The caption said, "A small love story revisited." I felt only a strange lightness and a whisper of amusement. My heart was no longer a vessel waiting to be noticed. It was a book I was writing in charcoal, not an object on an altar to be observed. But empires of convenience do not crumble at the sight of your personal reclamation. They rearrange. There would be consequences. A cooled merger, murmurs of instability in the board, a family that learns how much of their infrastructure rested on the assumption that their wife would perform compliance indefinitely. That is a problem for them. It is a consequence I accept because freedom has a price. After I had been away a week, the house sent a message through a family friend. "Please come home to discuss things." They assumed I would want the conversation to be staged and tidy. They had not yet learned that I was capable of unscripted answers. I wrote back, clean and precise. "There is nothing to discuss about return. There is everything to discuss about truth." I didn't send it. I burned the draft. The smoke was an old habit, a way of memorializing an intention without letting it be transformed into their theater. Leaving taught me that dignity is not loud. It's exact. It's the simple act of cleaning a cup until it shines, then deciding whether you want to keep the cup in your life. It's the decision to keep your name, rather than let it become a footnote. It's the choice to refuse the consolation that comes from being useful to someone else in the absence of being loved. The plane landed. I stepped into a city that smelled of rain and possibility, and I felt the peculiar, tentative joy of being unknown. I bought a bus ticket to a neighborhood where art students hung out, and began to attend a studio that took people who had no portfolio but a fierce will. They asked for little else than a willingness to show up. I had been showing up for 8 years in the same house like a clock, precisely and without expectation of notice. Now I would show up for myself.
The first hours at the studio felt like awkward muscle. My hands remembered the camera, not the brush. But a woman handed me acrylics like a peace offering. I painted a fountain and a ring and a pair of hands that had once been submerged. The strokes were clumsy and honest. I laughed. Laughter, practiced or not, loosens knots. I did not post photos of my new life. I wanted to live it before it was analyzed. I wanted a private archive. I wanted to be a plot point in my own story before anyone else could import their commentary. That is a small, fierce form of ownership, to hold your opening chapter until you are ready to gift it to the world. At night, I allowed myself to be tender about the small things. I bought pink roses and let them sit where I could see them, not because someone else liked them, but because I finally knew my own preference. The petals were soft against the pages of the notebook where I traced the contract, drawing circles around clauses with a pencil until the words blurred. There was a peculiar comfort in the blur, that the legal language that once enslaved me was now only ink, and ink can fade. But even distance does not make consequences evaporate. A week in the city and a message appears, a terse line from a number I had thought deactivated. It is from him, his voice in text, and the economy of his sentence is such that it both admits and avoids. It is the first concession, the first piecemeal recognition that something has been lost. It is a recognition that will bloom into regret if the world demands it. I did not respond. I was not prepared to be the audience for a repentance that had not been rehearsed in the right theater. I had been part of a yearbook of his life, a token in a page he turned without looking. Now the pages were mine to write. The first part of leaving is departure. The next part is the slow, exact work of rebuilding. You cannot reconstruct a life on headline impulses. You reconstruct it with studios at dawn and friends at odd hours and a willingness to be small and clumsy again. That more than anything terrifies people who profit from your predictability. I will not pretend it was easy. There were nights I wanted to call the house and ask if a familiar voice would crookedly say my name in the way it used to, a way that felt like belonging even when it was not loving. I kept that urge to myself. I learned to translate it into making paintings that I could not sell yet, into learning names of streets and the sound of the rain on a new roof. Freedom is not a sudden rush, it is a curriculum. But the contract still sits in an envelope back home, and the legalities still hum in the background like an engine. He and his family will try to salvage things, a public appeal, a staged humility, a narrative that he had been misled, that I had chosen drama over duty. They will craft their repentance to suit shareholders and the Fu family's patience.
They will be polite. They will be careful. For 8 years, he lied by withholding himself. For 8 years, I tried to love the shape of that withholding into something human. Now I am learning to love something else, myself, as an uncommodified person. It is slow work. It is real work. One night, long after the flight and the quiet studio mornings, a call comes through from a mutual acquaintance who cannot help but sound like gossip. "Have you heard?" she asks. "They say the merger might be postponed. They say things are unstable." Her voice drops as if she is revealing a secret that will make me tremble. I let her speak until she runs out of breath, and then I say clearly and without drama, "Things change. People learn what they need to when they look around them and find a hole where a person used to be." She sounds disappointed, as though I should have been delighted by chaos. I am oddly steady. The emptiness of a seat at a table does not delight me. It does not heal me, but it clarifies things for the people who remain, that certain decisions are consequences, and certain consequences are necessary. At the end of the month, I sell one of the paintings, a small one of a fountain, the ring suggested in blurred gold. It fetches less than I hoped. The buyer is a kind woman who says, "It spoke to me of leaving." I do not tell her that it was painted from the exactness of my own exit. I fold the money into the ledger of my life and buy a ticket to a modest exhibition space where my work, crumbled, hopeful, can be seen by a few people who don't know my past. It is sufficient. The world outsources stories into neat packages. For them, it will be tempting to frame my leaving as a scandal or as a failure. For me, the truth is less sensational. It is a string of decisions that led me away from a contract that never promised heart. 8 years is long enough to know what it is to be unseen daily. It is long enough to take measure and step away. They will regret. That is a certainty that does not console me. Regret is a private thing that arrives late and awkward when ventilators of power and certainty are unplugged and no one is there to claim the warmth.
I do not want their regret. If they feel it, it should be a lesson, not bait. I have no appetite for being beings to make someone else learn. My job is to continue. I keep my camera and my notebooks. I keep the charcoal stains on my fingers. I keep the knowledge that I can choose a life without being footnoted. I am still learning how to be small and brave at once. I am practicing on mornings. I am practicing on strange streets. There will be a day when he notices, in a way that is not mediated by headlines, the absence of my steady quiet. That day may be a banquet, or a boardroom, or a moment when Claire's laugh feels hollow against the new shape of his life. I will not be there to perform his redemption.
He will discover loss, perhaps, the way some people only ever discover meaning, after it has left the room. For now, I fold the final receipt into my notebook and write the words, "I left because I loved my life enough to choose it." It is not a dramatic sentence. It is true. I tuck the page into the sketchbook, close it, and sleep for the first time in years without the house's thin sigh of judgment threading through the rooms. Tomorrow, I will go back to the studio. I will learn to wash brushes properly. I will make new mistakes. I will call Elias, and we will eat noodles on a pavement bench like conspirators. Life will be ordinary and luminous in equal parts. The rest of the story will be complicated, as all honest stories are. It will involve lawyers and family meetings and public reckonings. It will involve the kind of regret that can't erase 8 years of habit. For now, the contract sits on a desk somewhere with my name in print, and I, Jocelyn, am on a bus to a life I have chosen. The city is awake. The sky is a paper blue. I pinch a pink rose between my fingers and press it into the page where my charcoal fountain curls into a ring. The petals leave a faint stain, like memory. I smile, not at anyone's mercy, but at the small, steady miracle of my own stubbornness. The story is not over. It is beginning in a new register, quieter, truer, and wholly mine. The exhibition opens on a damp evening. Rain slants past the gallery windows like thin curtains. People come with umbrellas and manufactured curiosity, with phones held like small suns. I stand by the doorway in a simple dark coat, my hands steady. The gallery smells of wet stone and oil paint, and the faint, honest perfume I have worn since the city learned my name. They expected a spectacle. They will make one anyway. My show is called Ledgers. The title is small on the announcement card, polite, almost shy. Inside, the space is spare. One wall holds the fountain painting I did months before, its water blurred gold where the ring floats like an unwanted planet. Across from it, a wall of small canvases shows pink roses in different lights. In the center, beneath a single suspended lamp, a vitrine holds the ring, set on a plain white cushion. Beside it, under glass, are printed pages. The contract. Not the whole thing, just the clauses that mattered, the lines that spelled out what our life was allowed to be and what it could not. I have redacted selfishly. Privacy matters even as truth does its work. People murmur. A critic from one of the city papers has come with a notebook. The gallery assistant whispers that the Pay family is on their way. They arrive as a current of silk and low assurance. Genevieve wears pearls like armor. The siblings fan themselves with polite interests. Claire slips through with a laugh that identifies her. Bright, practiced. Theodore appears last, late, and impeccably managed. He looks at the installation with the expression of a man seeing a play in which he is both author and subject and has not yet decided whether to be proud or embarrassed. He catches my eye, and there is a first flicker, surprise, then a tightening, then the rehearsed charm he thinks will suffice. People are already poised with cameras. I stay under the lamp where the ring sits, where the contract glints like a mirror. "You shouldn't have," his voice begins. It is low and full of the kind of regret that wants to be private but is now public by design. He thinks a quiet apology will undo spectacle. He does not know that spectacle can be used as a shield. "You taught me how to put things in boxes," I say. My voice carries better than I expect. People shift, drawn like moths to a new flame. He steps forward. Jocelyn. His name on his lips carries the old familiarity that once made me small. I have learned the ways names can be used to recalibrate a room. "Let me read something for everyone," I say, and I do not ask his permission. I do not need it. I read the paragraph that framed our life, public decorum, financial penalties, the footnote that measured obedience in installments. I read it slowly enough for the ink to find ears and for the room to tilt. Silence thickens, the kind that swallows small noises. Cameras click. Someone near the back says, "Oh,"
the way people say a prayer when they suddenly realize it is not about them. The pay matriarch flushes a practiced color. "This is theater," she says, as though theater absolves whatever else it reveals. "Art should be tasteful." "This is taste," I reply, "taste that obliges honesty." Claire's smile falls for a fraction of a second. She glances at Theodore. He looks like a man who has been caught in a window he did not know was open. He opens his mouth and shuts it again. "Elias," someone murmurs. At the doorway, standing against the rain-laced glass, Elias looks like someone who has grown into himself. He is not dramatic. He does not need to be. He watches the room like a harbor watches a storm. When he meets my gaze, I feel steadier. The political part of the evening begins quickly. An emissary from the Fu family stands off to the side with a face that has not yet decided whether to be furious or cautious. His eyes flick conspiratorially to Genevieve. Investments are spoken in looks. Theodore's assistant slips into his ear and mouths a string of words. The merger they had assumed would be smooth is now a calculus with new variables. "Why make this public?" Theodore asks finally, voice cracked slightly by something that might be emotion or might be irritation. He wants to frame this as his vanity hurt, not the story of a life mismanaged. "Because it should be public," I say. "Because I was not allowed to act in private." I let the sentence rest like a stone.
Because 8 years of being a legal definition rather than a person deserves more than a private apology. He steps closer, as if proximity could unmake the gallery's witness. "I never wanted to. You never chose me in any way that required you to be brave," I say. "You chose convenience. You made shows of courtship for people to watch, and then made your devotion selective and rare. I am not shouting. I am not crowing. There is clarity in my calm." He reaches out, the old reflex. People always reach. He has reached for me in airports and on terraces, as if proximity were an absolution. I step back slightly. The space between us is not only distance, it is a measure of decisions he refused to make. "I am sorry," he says, voice unraveling in earnest. "I didn't see." "You saw what you wanted to see," I answer. "You saw an arrangement that made your family secure and your life convenient. Seeing is different from choosing." A photographer asks for a statement. The critic scribbles. Conversations bloom like small, unattractive flowers. Theodore's apology begins to sound rehearsed. Fragments of admissions, a promise to do better. It is the language of people who believe remorse can be bought with intention. He speaks as if his regret will be the variable that returns me to the equation. "You can't buy back trust with words," I tell him. "You saw me as an asset, not a person. The contract made that explicit. Your apologies attempt to make love sound like a sudden financial correction." He looks younger in that moment, as if the steady face he wore in boardrooms is a mask sliding. "I didn't know how to," he starts, and his voice breaks open. He tries to explain Claire away, to confess confusion, to make his want seem like an accident rather than a pattern. "Then you didn't know to be human," I say. "There is a difference." Crowds drift closer. Someone asks about the money. If the merger with the Fu family is endangered, their eyes glitter with the prospect of power rebalanced. A journalist asks, was the contract legally enforceable? I do not answer their procedural question. I answer the human one. "It defined what I could do," I say, "not who I was." It is enough in the room. People lean on it like a table leg. The Fu emissary's expression has shifted. He is now calculating reputational risk in a way that maps onto his boardroom percentages. The Pace siblings mutter about shareholders and image. Genevieve speaks into the phone with a voice that sounds like a treaty forming. I move through the crowd at a slow, measured pace. I step up to a bank of windows that look out over the street and press my palm against the glass. Rain blurs the city into confetti. Theodore follows, and behind him, like a pack of consequences, come family members and business heads. He reaches for me again in public and in private, both spaces now compromised. "You can't expect me to," he begins. "Expect what?" I say. "For me to step back into an arrangement that was always borderless for you, but cage-like for me. For me to accept being a footnote so your life can keep its main characters." He swallows. He looks as if the room is suddenly too small. He says. Then his face drains. He has always been fine under pressure. Tonight, he is not. "It is not me who must make a spectacle of myself," he says instead, voice thinning. "I am—" His words catch. He staggers, and for a dreadful second I think he will recover. He does not. He holds his hand to his mouth, then moves towards the restroom at the far end of the gallery. A cluster of onlookers parts. His assistant hurries after him. Moments later there is a commotion. Someone calls for a car. He has been ill before. Stress has been spoken about in the margins of press pieces as a rumor, like a weather pattern people notice but do not name. Tonight, the illness is public. I watch the scene with the strange detachment of someone observing a body detached from the person she once thought would be companion.
I walk back to the vitrine. The ring catches the lamplight like a small sun. For 8 years I have carried the taste of being public and private in equal measures. For 8 years I was expected to answer to a ledger. For 8 years he withheld what could have been the small daily currency of choosing. The rest of that week turns into a set of private storms and public calculations. The Fu family issues a measured statement that is careful in its distance. Investors call meetings. A boardroom episode occurs in a high-rise where I imagine glass as thin as the promises men make to themselves. They assemble the charts, the projections, the risk assessments. Reputational exposure, they say. They talk like surgeons dissecting a body whose pulse they assume will restart. Theodore's collapse becomes an image that circulates, carefully framed by spokespeople. He is photographed leaving a hospital with his hand bandaged. The public is permitted to see a wound. They are not given the ledger that explains how wounds were formed. I receive a message through an intermediary. Come to talk. He is contrite in the way men in my life have been contrite, immediately, expansively, as if apology could substitute for years. I decline. I do not want a forum for his guilt. I do not want my life to be the stage on which he practices sorrow. But the world does not leave things tidy. There are consequences for absence. Shareholders grow impatient. The pay matriarch convenes a family meeting that reads like a tribunal. They call my departure a crisis. They whisper about the contract and the clauses and what it will cost them should they activate penalties. They speak of forfeiture like a financial dance, trying to make hardship a language that relieves them of guilt. I get a call one night from a broker, not a friend, a man who moves numbers like waves. He tells me the Fu family is frigid.
The merger is on ice until they can be sure that risk is contained. They say it's a governance issue, he says. They say the optics are... I let him finish. The business consequences are now public. It is not my intention to ruin anybody. It is my intention to be free. There is a particularly sharp article in the morning paper that tries to be balanced. Private lives, public consequences. The headline is a neat sentence that places each blame with an equalizer. The article quotes a corporate strategist who suggests that personal instability translates into market volatility. It writes me as if I were a variable in a spreadsheet. I paint anyway. Painting is not a coup. It does not change press cycles. It changes the pattern of my days. My mornings are now workshop hours where I learn the stubbornness of brushes and the way color can be honest in ways words are not. Elias comes with me sometimes and brings 2 cups of coffee and an unassuming steadiness. We meet in the studio and sit with a silence that is not empty. He asks me about small things, the way a brush moves, the way wet paint smells in a summer rain. He practices the art of attention in ways that are not theatrical. Meanwhile, the Pei household bears the strain of my absence. There are meetings I cannot know about that are announced in memos. There is a family conference filmed for internal counsel where names like liability and precedent are used like beatitudes. The siblings argue about optics and loyalty. There are tears that show up in the margins of call logs. Genevieve's voice, once confident, thins in conversations. I do not gloat at their unraveling. I am not that woman. I am busy making new mistakes with a palette. Word arrives that works in my exhibit have been the topic of water cooler conversation in the offices of the Fu family. The emissary from Fu calls my gallery and asks for a private viewing. He is polite and cautious in equal measure. His interest is half curiosity and half damage control. He sees that a country club of influence can lose its axes when public sympathy shifts. 1 week later, a banquet is convened at a hotel the size of a city block, an event that has to look like reconciliation in order to keep certain parties comfortable. The Pei family arranges it as a show of internal strength. I am invited, though my name on the guest list is framed as a courtesy. I go because I know their theater and want to see their final acts before the curtain closes for good. They seat me at a table near the back, where light is softer and rhetoric travels thinner. The room is a constellation of polite faces. The Fu emissary sits at the head and gives a speech that uses words like continuity and vision. People nod. It is business as usual, and that is the problem. Their performance of normalcy is meant to normalize me back into a role.
Halfway through the meal, a server accidentally spills chili oil near my arm, a red smear on my sleeve like a punctuation mark. A laugh ripples through the table. The oil is the same motif as before, decades compressed into a single recurring symbol. I press a napkin to my sleeve and feel the old burn of being amused at by careful people. Theodore watches me across the table with an intensity that once felt like affection. Now it feels like a pressure. He leaves the table, murmuring a reason about air, and I watch him go. People at the table try to console me with practiced phrases. Scandal has its place, someone says. This will pass. It will not pass. It will accrete into consequences. After the speeches, when the lights are dimmed and the chandeliers look like constellations, he approaches me in a corridor. He is pale. His eyes are rimmed with something I used to think was exhaustion. We walk into a small service staircase that smells of coffee and late-night cleaning supplies. "You shouldn't have made my life public," he says, voice small. "I didn't make your life public. I have, sir. I made a part of it visible. I made the ledger legible for anyone who cared to read." "Please," he says, "come home. I can fix things. I will fix them." He reaches for me, as if proximity is remedy. "Fix what?" I ask. "Fix the optics? Fix how you feel in your private hours? Fix the fact that for 8 years you let your choices be public art while leaving your heart absent?" His hand trembles. "I know now," he says. "I know now that I—" Then his face twists unexpectedly, and he grasps at the banister. He steadies himself with both hands. The sight is grotesque in its ordinary way. A man who has spent years calibrated to a certain scale, suddenly failing at the measurement of his own body. He asks if anyone nearby can help, and a security guard calls for a car. He is pale, and there is bile on his lips when he speaks. It is a moment that strips him of the carefully arranged dignity the family had spent years constructing. He is taken to a clinic near the hotel. The press sent a story. They probe. "Exhaustion," his assistant says, smiling in the way people who work for the powerful do when they must make sickness look like narrative. "Stress," the official statement reads. The family circulates the preferred wording. It is always the same: minimize, reframe, control. But control has limits. Bodies have their own truth. The fallout is not immediate in the papers. Instead, the market reacts with the steady, indifferent logic of commerce. Shares dip. The Fu family postpones a call. The merger is not dead, but it is cold. Lawyers whisper about contingency plans. The pay matriarch takes calls with the single-mindedness of someone patching holes. "We must be above scandal," she says into the phone. "We must maintain stability."
Meanwhile, a splinter of the press begins to ask the question no spokespeople want. What had the contract really meant for her life? A journalist, ruthless, exact, contacts me and asks whether I would go on record about the clauses that mattered. He promises discretion and the kind of exactitude that makes a truth land with the force of evidence. I am careful. The lawyer I engaged months ago consults. We weigh the cost of publicizing private law. There is a danger. The contract could be used against me, spun into fodder that will make me appear mercenary. There is also a truth that if left unspoken will be rewritten. I choose truth with caution. The interview is scheduled in a studio that smells of coffee and false neutrality. The journalist asks direct questions. I answer with clarity. I read aloud parts of the clause that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with obedience. When the piece runs in the paper, it shifts the language of the public conversation. People who had once treated the story as a society piece now see a document, a set of rules. Lawyers discuss precedent. A few op-eds take the family to task for having constructed social advantage at the expense of agency. Theodore watches this tide with an expression I have seen him wear rarely: real fear. He escorts himself into the open with an apology that this time, unlike the rehearsed ones, quivers and fractures. He confesses in interviews that he regrets what he did not do and what he allowed. But regret, as I have learned, is a domestic thing. It arrives in the company of those who will listen and does not always change systemic patterns. A few weeks later, when the markets have adjusted and the Pei family's PR has deployed like an armory, Theodore seeks me out again. He comes to my small apartment where paintbrushes lean like a modest army and the air smells, at last, of my own making. He sits on a chair near the window and looks like a man removed of artifice. "I thought I loved you once," he says, voice small as a confession. "I thought I did. But I realize now I never loved you the way you deserved. I loved a shape you fit into. I loved what you provided. I didn't see you as you were." Words like these arrive late, and they always do. He looks exhausted, as if the fatigue is not only physical this time, but moral. "I have tried to apologize," he says. "I have tried to fix what I can. Please, consider coming back. We will redo things. We can throw away the contract. You can void a legal document," I say, "but you cannot unteach the habit of not choosing." I speak slowly, making room for the weight of the sentence. "You have to learn to show up the way people who love well do. That isn't a clause to renegotiate. That is a practice you must decide to live." He bows his head. "Then, let me practice." "No," I say. It is a small word that lands like a seal.
He looks like a man who has been waiting for a different answer, the one that would make him whole.
He wants redemption in the form of my return. He imagines that reconciliation is a tidy arc that will put everything back in place. He does not understand that we are not the same pages. I left because I loved a life enough to choose it, I tell him, the sentence I had written in my sketchbook months before. It is a compass that points in an honest direction. I left because I could not be someone's convenience anymore. I left because I would rather be small and honest than grand and invisible. He reaches for my hand. I allow him a small human touch, an acknowledgement. Elias watches from the doorway, holding 2 cups of tea as if he has been waiting for this moment, like a bell. He steps into the room with a quiet sentence, "I will take care of her." Theodore looks between Elias and me, as if measuring what he lost. Pride, when it falls, looks like pleading. He tries again to speak, to persuade, to offer 1,000 small promises. "You didn't listen when you had the chance," I say. "You are asking me to be your audience now while you practice being present. I will not be that exercise." He collapses into a chair then, the air leaking from his posture like wind from a torn sail. It is not a violent moment. It is a human breaking. He begins to cry, full, real tears that are not meant for a camera, but for an empty corner where guilt echoes. "It's not about the theater for me," he says between breaths. "It is about remembering that you are—" "I know what I am," I answer. "I know what I deserve. I want to be chosen without having to invent performances to coax you. I want small things, to be called in the morning, to be missed in the evening, to have my jokes learned rather than tolerated." He nods, wet-faced. "Then learn," I say, "but learn without me as your primary grade. I will not be part of a curriculum designed to make you whole only after you have lost what mattered." He begs, he pleads. He says that he was trapped in the expectations of his family and the obligations of a life devised by men and women who mistake tradition for truth. He says he let things crystallize until they were frozen. He asks for forgiveness. I give pause. Forgiveness is a muscle I have been exercising in small ways, forgiving myself for the choices I made under duress, forgiving the parts of him that were human and limited. But forgiveness is not the same as returning to a life where those limits become my daily architecture. Forgiveness is mine to give, I tell him, but reconciliation is a different thing. He leaves the apartment later in a shell of a man. He limps out my life in a way that will be examined in public columns. The Pei family will attempt to perform contrition. The press will make theater of his near illness. The Fu family will measure risk and decide whether their alliances make sense.
In the weeks that follow, shareholders and lawyers keep the Pei family busy. There's talk of demotion and reorganization in internal memos I will never see. The world that once framed me as prop argues about their own damage control. They arrange apologies like items on a menu. I go about my days painting, teaching a small workshop to women who like to bring their own scars. I sell a painting at a modest auction for a charity that supports agency and legal counsel for women in coercive arrangements. The ring I had placed in trust, retrieved through a chain of legal maneuvers I did not relish, is auctioned quietly at the gallery. The proceeds go to a fund for women's legal assistance. The vitrine is empty afterwards. The gold has lost the sheen of being a talisman and regained the currency of purpose. The public notices and misreads. Some say I capitalized on spectacle. Others wonder whether the contract was necessary or a social sin. Opinions bloom like weeds. I do not read them all. I read the letters from younger women who tell me that my story, my quiet, unflashy decisions, gave them the courage to ask questions. One woman writes that she carried my description of the contract into a lawyer's office and demanded to know what exactly the term obligation meant. Another writes that she paid a deposit on a course because she was ready not to be defined by someone else's ledger. Elias is in the margins of my life in ways that are steady. We are not dramatic. We are domestic in the small ways that feel like radical acts after 8 years of performance. He brings me tea. He makes faces at dogs we see on the street. We argue gently about trivial things. He makes space in my life for tenderness that is not consumed by grand gestures. It is the ordinary that heals me most. The way someone remembers your favorite crossing, your coffee preference, the line of your thumb. As months pass, Theodore's regret becomes a journalistic theme.
He gives interviews where he says, "I played a role and forgot the person," which is in its way a valid summation, but also a way of keeping blame diffuse. He offers public apologies to a camera that requires tears. Corporate life reshuffles. There are consequences, demotions, shifts in strategy. The Pei family is bruised, but not destroyed. Life moves on as it must. One evening, a year after my exhibition, I am invited back to a small charity gala to speak about agency and the cost of choices. Being invited is not an act of vanity. It is a sign that some part of my story turned into a small tool for others. I speak simply about the difference between legal obligation and love. I say that contracts can be instruments of protection, but also traps if they are written without consent. I speak about the quiet rebellions that saved me, charcoal stains on fingers, small notebooks filled with sketches, and ability to choose ordinary things like pink roses. After the speech, a woman approaches.
She hands me a small envelope and says nothing more. Inside is a letter from a young sister in a family where choices feel compressed. She thanks me for my example. The letter trembles in my hand like a small pulse. Theodore's life continues in a way that proves the slow weight of choices. His public regret does not unmake the past. He attends therapy briefly, runs certain gestures through the filter of accountability. But you cannot retroactively live the small choices you once abandoned. Sometimes he appears at charity functions as a half-apologetic presence. Once I see him across a room watching a woman explain her work with a genuine interest. For a moment I imagine an alternate life where he would have practiced daily attention. I do not dwell there. Claire's presence dims in the public imagination during this period. She continues to move in social circles with practiced buoyancy, but the center of attention no longer rotates around her like a planet. People find other matters to be curious about. She remains, in essence, a woman who liked to be seen. There is no scandal around her. She continues her life with the kind of momentum granted by attention. I have moments of mourning, small ones, where I miss what I once thought marriage offered, a public acceptance, a shared history to call on. But mourning is different from regret. Mourning is an honest accounting of loss. Regret is a temptation to return to what compromised you. I choose learning over longing. I practice patience with myself most of all. One late afternoon, I walk through the market where I once bought pink roses for the simple joy of choosing them. The petals brush my fingers and smell of spring. I press a bloom into a page of a new sketchbook and feel the petal leave its faint stain. It is a small act of ceremony. There is no grand triumph. Triumph rarely looks like fireworks. It looks often like paying the rent and still sleeping at night. The last time I see Theodore in any kind of concentrated way, it is at a small press event where a writer reads an essay on family and duty. He sits in the back row like a repentant figure, and when our eyes meet, there is a conversation that needs no words. He mouths the word sorry with a bare intensity. I lift my hand slightly, not in greeting, but as a small acknowledgement that we have been through something together. He is learning now the practice of attention. I hope he succeeds. I do not need to be his teacher. In the end, my refusal to return is not a punishment. It is a boundary. It is the kind of thing that clarifies a life. It cannot be a spectacle for others. It must be kept as a quiet truth I hold like a seed in my pocket. I marry no public vengeance to the decision. I sell a few sentimental items and donate the proceeds. I keep the small practice of caring for my hands. I teach a class now and then about finding your subject and making it your life, rather than letting a life be written by others.
Elias and I find a rhythm that is unambitious in the best possible way. We make dinners that are not for audiences. We argue about the proper way to dry a brush. We plan a modest trip to a place with sea air, where the galleries are small and the color of the light is soft. We are acutely ordinary and acutely, gloriously ourselves. When people ask me now, months later, years perhaps, they ask whether returning would have been possible. They want the cinematic version where the wronged woman and the remorseful man reconcile with a final tear and a dramatic embrace. I tell them the truer thing, that people do not change in an instant. Habits are not erased. Love that is real is daily, small, imperfect, and requires risk-taking that exists beyond statements. If you wanted to know what love looked like for me, it looked like being remembered, not merely shown to be remembered in a speech. He lied to me for 8 years. He did it not always with malice, but with omission, and with the omission of choice. When I walked away,
He noticed the absence. Regret arrived, public, tender, and inadequate. Regret is not a currency I accept in place of consistency. I was not interested in being the instrument of his moral education. I wanted my life. I walk away from that last intersection with a calm that is not victory posed for cameras. It is quiet and unadorned. Elias walks with me to an old bridge overlooking water that is not our fountain, but a river with its own patterns. We talk about nothing and everything. He picks a pink rose and tucks it into the page of the sketchbook I never stop carrying. The petal leaves its small mark. The book grows heavier with truth and color. If this story moved you, subscribe for more honest stories about people who choose themselves, and keep watching. There are more lives, more small rebellions, and more quiet recoveries to share.